The winter of 1889 had settled into the bones of Willow Creek like a debt come due. Snow clung to the cottonwoods along the frozen banks, and the wind howled down from the hills with a voice like old regrets. On the edge of town, tucked between barren pasture and brittle fence line, sat the Hamilton Ranch, a patch of Wyoming earth as worn and proud as the woman who owned it. Grace Hamilton stood at the barn doors, her gloved hands buried in the pockets of a threadbare coat. Her eyes, the color of burnt honey, scanned the eastern trail with a gaze sharp enough to cut hide. She wasn't waiting for salvation. Grace had learned long ago it don't come in the form of miracles. But she was waiting on something. A man from an agency out in Cheyenne, sent in response to a desperate letter she'd penned by oil lamp 2 weeks past. The letter had been plain. Help wanted. Cattle drive assistance. Ranch in financial distress. Room and board included. She didn't mention that the roof leaked in 3 rooms, or that the last ranch hand ran off when the creek froze solid. Nor did she mention the bank breathing down her neck, or that she'd sold her mother's brooch just to keep the ranch hands pay current one last month. She needed hands. Strong ones. She didn't expect a man who showed up to be young. The rider crested the ridge just after noon, his horse a tall sorrel with a dark blaze down its nose. The man rode like someone raised in a saddle, easy and sure, like he knew how to coax truth out of wild animals. He wore a plain coat, dusty from travel, and a hat pulled low over dark eyes. When he dismounted, he stood tall, not overly broad but rangy, like a wind-worn pine, strong, lean, and stubborn as the day is long. "You Grace Hamilton?" he asked. His voice was rough, but not unfriendly. There was a kind of stillness to him, the kind a man carried from seeing too much and saying too little. "I am," she said. "You the one from the Cheyenne agency?" "I am," he echoed, but didn't offer a name. "Well," Grace said, "I hope you know cattle. 'Cause we got 40 head that need moving before the next snow, and I got a fence line that's so bent it's practically a suggestion." "I know cattle," he said simply, "and I ain't afraid of work." She eyed him a moment longer. Something about the way he carried himself stirred an unease in her belly. Not fear, but familiarity, like she'd seen his type before, but couldn't quite place where. Still, a woman in her position couldn't afford to be too choosy. "You'll sleep in the bunkhouse," she said, turning on her heel. "Ain't fancy, but it's dry. Supper's at dusk if you earn it." The man didn't flinch. He simply nodded once, then followed her down the icy path toward the outbuildings. As they passed the edge of the property, he paused near the fence line, eyes lingering on the neighboring land, once owned by the old Moore family, now left fallow and tangled. Grace noticed but didn't ask. Folks around here didn't talk much about that land. Bad luck seemed to hang on it like mildew in a damp cellar. Later that evening, after supper, beans and bacon cooked over a wood stove, the man finally spoke more than a few words. "Name's Elias," he said. "Elias Moore." The name hit her like a stray shot. "Moore," she echoed, spoon frozen halfway to her lips. He nodded. "My father owned the land east of here. Died when I was 12. I was sent east to an uncle in Missouri. Didn't come back till last week." Grace's mind reeled. She remembered the Moores, especially the scandal. Rumors of debt, of disappearances. And now here he was, sitting at her kitchen table, his boots dusty from her land, and eyes that held stories too heavy for the telling. She didn't speak, not right away, but her grip on the spoon loosened. Sometimes, she reckoned, the past don't stay buried. Sometimes it rides up quiet on a red horse, with eyes like storms. The days that followed moved like frozen molasses. Bitter winds scoured the hills, and Elias worked the ranch like a man trying to outrun something he couldn't name. He fixed the fence line without being asked, broke a stubborn gelding in half the time Grace had wagered, and even got the barn door rehung after the last snowstorm near tore it clean off its hinges. Grace watched him with quiet eyes, arms always crossed, as if holding herself steady against both the cold and the man who stirred something she'd buried long ago. "You work fast," she said one morning as Elias loaded fresh hay into the feeder trough. He wiped a sleeve across his brow. "I was raised to earn my keep." "You were raised here?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. Until I wasn't. My pa, James Moore, he ran this land. Till he didn't. Grace didn't press. The Moore land had sat empty for near a decade. Folks in Willow Creek used to whisper about what happened out there. Some said James drank himself into a grave. Others said he gambled it all away and disappeared. The truth had gotten muddy with time, like most things. But that night, with wind rattling the shutters and coffee warming her hands, Grace found herself a skin, the thing that had been scratching at her all day. "Why come back?" she asked Elias. "After all these years. Why this place?" Elias didn't answer right away. He leaned back in the chair by the hearth, eyes fixed on the flames. "Man gets tired of running, eventually," he said. "Figured I'd come back and see what was left. Maybe claim what's mine." Grace's heart skipped. "The Moore land." He nodded. "Found a deed in my uncle's papers. Turns out my father never sold it. Just abandoned it. Means it's mine by law." Grace felt the floor till beneath her. That land shared her southern border. If someone put up fences, it would cut her off from the spring-fed creek that kept her herd watered when the summers burned hot. She leaned forward, voice tight. "You plan on building?" she asked. "Maybe. Maybe not." Elias met her gaze. "I ain't made up my mind yet." The room grew quiet, thick with unsaid things. Later, after he'd gone to the bunkhouse, Grace stood alone at the window, looking out across the frozen pasture. The moonlight painted long shadows on the snow, and in the distance, the moorland looked darker somehow, like it remembered things the world had tried to forget. She thought of her father, gone now near 6 years. How he'd worked the ranch with hands calloused from honest work, and how he always warned her to keep peace with neighbors, even when they didn't act neighborly. "Land ain't worth much if it's soaked in bad blood," he used to say. She wondered if that truth still held. The next morning, as the sky turned from gray to gold, Grace found Elias at the fence line, just staring toward the old Moore property like he could see the bones of his past poking up through the frost. "Elias," she said, and he turned. "You're not just here for work, are you?" He didn't lie. "No." She nodded slowly. "Then I suppose we both got reasons to be careful." He gave a quiet nod in return. "Suppose we do." And so it was, the woman fighting to save her ranch, and the man who might be the one to undo it. Neither knew it yet, but the storm wasn't in the sky. It was right there between them. The snow fell thick that week, cloaking the valley in silence and white. Grace rode fence each morning, checking the line for breaks or signs of wolves, while Elias kept to the barn, tending tack, patching roofs, and moving, like a man who'd made peace with hard work. But peace has a way of shot-airing easy out here. It was just afternoon when Grace heard the gallop, hooves pounding fast, angry. She stepped out of the barn, shotgun resting easy in her arms, just as a rider tore through the eastern edge of the property. It was Wade Cutter. Every town's got one. Loud, mean, with a bloodline full of bad decisions. Cutter ran a small spread south of the creek, always hungry for more land, more power. He'd once offered to merge their ranches, meaning hers become his. She'd said no. Hard. He hadn't forgiven her since. "Grace," he called, reining in too close for manners. She didn't flinch. "You're trespassing, Wade." "Just looking for a stray," he lied, though his eyes weren't looking for cattle. They were locked on Elias, who just stepped out of the barn. "Well," Grace said coolly, "you found nothing but a fence line that says go back where you came from." Wade's grin turned mean. "Didn't know you took to hiring strangers. This one got a name, or is he just here to warm your barn at night?" Grace raised the shotgun a fraction. "Leave, Wade. Now." But Elias stepped forward, slow and calm. "My name's Elias Moore," he said, "and I'd appreciate you not speaking to the lady that way." Wade's face changed. Recognition hit like a thunderclap. "Moore," he spat. "As in James Moore? Ain't that a name best left buried?" "Maybe," Elias said, "but I'm not my father." Wade leaned forward in the saddle, his voice low and venomous. "Land like that don't stay empty unless it's cursed. You stay on it. Don't come crying when the ghosts come knocking." Then he turned his horse hard and rode off in a cloud of snow and dust. Grace lowered her shotgun. Elias didn't move. You didn't have to do that, she said. He nodded. Maybe not, but it needed saying. She looked at him then, truly looked, and for the first time, she saw the fight in him. Not the kind that starts bar brawls or robs banks, but the kind that stands when it ought to run, the kind that stays. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching dusk settle over the frozen land, Grace spoke without looking at him. What happened out there with your family? Why'd your father leave? Elias was quiet a long time. When he finally spoke, it was slow, careful. My father made enemies. Bad ones. Took loans from the wrong men. When the market crashed, he lost the herd. Then the land. Then himself. He ran. He drank. Then disappeared. I was 12. They sent me east. He glanced at her. I swore I'd come back someday. Make it right. Grace felt the old familiar ache settle in her chest. Ain't always easy to fix the past. No, he said, but sometimes it's worth trying. The wind shifted then, cold and sharp. Off in the distance, a coyote howled, long and lonesome. Grace didn't speak again, but she didn't get up either. And Elias? He just sat beside her, watching the dark gather round the hills like a curtained Fallon before the real show began. The next morning dawned brittle and cold, the kind of cold that makes your bones creak before you do. Elias was already at the corral, working a skittish roan that had near bucked the fence clean the day before. Grace watched from the kitchen window, coffee in hand, her breath fogging the glass. She'd grown used to his quiet presence, the way he handled things with calm steadiness. But every time she looked at him, she saw the shadow of the land next door rising between them, like a fence no wire could hold. After breakfast, Grace saddled up her mare and rode out east, drawn like a moth to the flame of questions. The moorland wasn't marked, no fences, no sign of anyone setting foot there since the last snow. But the closer she got, the more she felt it. It wasn't just the silence. It was the way the wind shifted, the way the trees leaned. And then she saw it, a man in a black coat, standing near the tree line, half hidden behind the bare limbs of a juniper. He didn't wave, didn't move, just watched her with the stillness of a hunter waiting on a mistake. Grace rode back fast, her heart kicking like a spooked colt. Elias met her at the barn, eyes narrowing the second he saw her face. There was someone on your land, she said. North edge. Watching. Elias's jaw tightened. How many? Just one. But he wasn't no drifter. Elias didn't say a word. He disappeared into the bunkhouse and came out with a rifle she hadn't known he owned. You expecting trouble? She asked. I was hoping not to, he replied. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. The wind had changed again, carrying something sharp with it, like iron and old sins. She found herself downstairs, pacing the floor in her boots and coat, the shotgun resting easy in her arms. Elias appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, boots half-laced. You ain't gonna catch sleep like that, he said. She looked at him, and for the first time, let the words out. If someone comes for that land, if you're thinking of staying, what happens to me? Elias stepped closer. Grace, I came here to reclaim something, but I didn't expect to find you. She blinked, surprised by the softness in his voice. You ain't what I came for, he said, but you might be the reason I stay. The silence that followed was heavy as a thundercloud. Then the dogs barked, sharp, frantic. Outside, the night shattered with a sound that chilled her blood. A gunshot. Elias moved first, rifle in hand, already halfway out the door. Grace followed. They found the barn door swinging wide, one of the heifers spooked in blood on the snow. No intruder, just tracks. Two sets, one heavy, one light, vanishing into the trees. Elias knelt beside them, his jaw tight. Someone's testing us, he said. Grace's fingers tightened around the stock of her gun. Then they're gonna find out we bite. The next few days passed in a haze of tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Grace kept her shotgun propped beside the door, and Elias slept light, waking at every creak of timber. The barn stayed locked. The cattle moved skittish, and out beyond the hills, the silence stretched too long and too still. On the fourth day, it happened. Elias was out fixing the southern fence line when he saw it. Smoke rising, thin and dirty, from the edge of a moorland. Not the soft curl of a campfire, but the wide black smear of burning brush. He rode hard, rifle slung and mind racing. What he found chilled him worse than any snow. The old Moore homestead, just a collapsed shell of wood and ash, had been torched. Someone had struck a match and let the past burn. He dismounted, checked the ground. 3 horses. Fresh tracks. One of them wore shoes with a chipped toe. He'd seen that mark before. On Wade Cutter's mount. By the time he returned to the Hamilton ranch, dusk had fallen and Grace stood on the porch, waiting with a lantern held high. "They burned it," he said before she asked. "The house. My father's place." Grace's mouth tightened, but she didn't ask why. She knew. Wade Cutter had made his move. "You gonna fight for it?" she asked. Elias looked up at the dark hills, then back to her. "Not just for the land anymore." That night, he spread a map across the kitchen table, one drawn from memory, marked with creeks and ridgelines and old cow paths. Grace leaned over it, her finger tracing a narrow cut through the hills. "They'll come at dawn," she said. "That's how Wade works, while honest folks are still rubbing sleep from their eyes." Elias nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She looked at him hard then. "This ranch, this life, I've bled for it. I ain't here to take it," Elias said softly. "I'm here to help you keep it." And somehow she believed him. As the night dragged on, they loaded rifles, prepared feed for the cattle, and set traps near the brush line. At some point, the coffee turned cold, and their words ran dry, but they stood side by side, like 2 stubborn stones in a river that never stops rushing. When the first light broke over the hills, it brought shadows with it. 3 riders, moving slow and sure. Wade Cutter led the pack, his smirk plain as sunrise. "You think this land's yours, Moore?" he called out. "You don't even know what your pa owed me." "I know enough," Elias said, stepping forward with the rifle slung low. "I know you torch homes and threaten women. That about right." Wade's smirk died. "I ain't a skin again," Elias continued. "You ride off now, or you find out what my side of the line feels like." The silence stretched. Then Grace stepped forward, her shotgun raised, boots firm in the frost. "I don't bluff, Wade," she said, "and I don't miss." Wade stared at her, saw the fire in her eyes, and for a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he turned his horse. The other 2 followed. They didn't look back. That evening, the sun set soft and gold behind the hills. No smoke, no gunfire, just peace, earned in quiet. Grace stood at the fence line, arms crossed. Elias joined her. "Still thinking about staying?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I think," he said finally, "I already did." The days that followed were quieter, but not calm. Grace knew better than to trust silence in the West. It had a habit of snapping shut like a trap. Wade Cutter didn't return, not right away, but his absence was heavy as a thunderhead, just waiting to break. Elias rode the edge of the Moore land each morning, keeping watch, while Grace kept the ranch running. Fences mended, feed bags stacked, livestock checked and watered. One morning, while clearing the eastern pasture, Elias came upon something he hadn't expected. A rusted iron post, half buried near the old homestead, wrapped with a length of chain. Digging deeper, he unearthed a stone, flat, worn. The name James Moore scratched into it with a knife. A grave. His father's. No cross. No words. Just a name and a piece of earth. He stood over it for a long time, hat in hand, heart heavy. Grace found him there just before sundown, and said nothing. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I thought he ran." "Looks like he didn't," she replied. Elias crouched beside the grave. "I hated him. For a long time. For leaving. For dying on his land and not sending for me. I thought he didn't want me back." Grace didn't offer comfort. She knew some hurts had to be spoken before they could be healed. "I came back for the land," Elias said. "But maybe I came back to bury what's left of him." They stood together in silence, wind brushing the grass around the grave like a lullaby for ghosts. Back at the ranch, they ate in the warm quiet of the kitchen. Elias sipped coffee from a cracked enamel cup, and Grace finally asked the thing that had lingered too long between them. "What do you want to do with the land?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "I want to build it back. Not for him. For me. For something that lasts." Grace held his gaze. "It'll be hard. I know. And I've only got one pair of hands to spare." He smiled, small but real. "Then I'm lucky they're yours." Later that week, a letter came, delivered by the town's mail rider, dusty and frozen from his trail. It was addressed to Elias Moore, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. He opened it slow, read it once, then twice. Grace watched his face shift, eyes darkening. "What is it?" she asked. Elias folded the paper, tucked it into his coat. "Wade Cutter filed a claim," he said quietly. "He says the Moore land's forfeited under unpaid debt from my father's time." "But the deed," Grace began. "He's got a judge in Cheyenne ready to rule on it. Wants me in court in 2 weeks. Or I lose it all." Grace straightened, jaw tight. "He's trying to do what bullets couldn't." Elias nodded. "He's counting on me not showing. Counting on me giving up." Grace's eyes narrowed. "Then we better start packing." He looked at her, surprised. "You're coming?" She gave him a look that could cut fence wire. "You think I'd let you walk into that fight alone?" Elias smiled then, not big, not flashy, but the kind that sticks with a man. "No," he said. "I reckon I don't." The train to Cheyenne was slow and bone-rattling, the kind of ride that gives you too much time to think. Elias stared out the window, jaw set like stone. Grace sat across from him, gloved hands folded tight in her lap, her hat pulled low against the glare. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Both were turning the same worry over in their minds, whether justice in Cheyenne was worth the ink it was written in. The courtroom was plain, no gold trim, no polish. Just benches, a rail, and a judge who looked like he hadn't smiled since the war. Wade Cutter was already there, boots shined and smirking, flanked by a lawyer from Laramie in a 3-piece suit and a voice slicker than rain on tin. Elias stood alone, until Grace rose. She crossed the room, heels echoing like gunshots, and stood beside him. The judge lifted an eyebrow. "I ain't his lawyer," she said, "but I know the land better than most. And I know what kind of man Wade Cutter is." Gasps rippled through the benches. Wade shifted in his seat. The hearing started. The lawyer talked slick, waved old debt papers around like gospel, said the land had never truly belonged to Elias, that the Moore name had been washed away by failure and unpaid dues. Elias said little, but when asked to speak, he did so clear. "My father made mistakes," he said, "but the deed was never sold. I didn't come to erase the past. I came to build on what's left." Then Grace stepped forward. "Wade Cutter tried to take my land too," she said. "Not with a gun. With threats. With silence. With shadows." The courtroom shifted. Men leaned in. Women nodded. The judge called a recess. For an hour, Elias paced the hall like a caged coyote, Grace at his side. When the gavel fell again, it came down like thunder. "The land stands under the name Moore," the judge said. "Unpaid debts die with a man. The deed is valid. Case closed." Wade cursed under his breath and stormed from the courtroom. Grace smiled tight, restrained, but her hand found Elias's, and he didn't let go. The ride back to Willow Creek was quiet, but warm. The kind of quiet that means something's settling into place. Weeks passed. Spring thawed the snow, and green crept back across the hills. Elias worked the land with fresh boards and steadier hands. Fences rose. The soil turned. A new barn was framed with help from Grace's last ranch hand and a pair of neighbors who'd once kept their distance, but now saw something different, a man worth trusting. One evening, after the work was done and the sun dipped low behind the buttes, Grace and Elias stood on the porch of the newly raised house. "You really staying?" she asked. "I got roots now," he said. "Took long enough." Grace nodded slow. Then she turned to him, eyes sharp. "I never was the settling kind, Elias, but I reckon you might have made a home worth settling in." He smiled. "You saved this ranch," she added, "and not just with fences." He took her hand. Calloused met calloused. Strong met strong. And there, under a sky big enough to hold every mistake and every hope. Two folks who never expected to find each other shared a quiet, honest truth. Not all outlaws wear masks. Not all heirs come for gold. And sometimes love rides in slow, steady as a ranch horse, without a single warning.